Today, we're traveling across continents and through time, tracing the incredible journey of William Dean.
A man who dedicated his life to spreading his faith.
He faced challenges that would make most people, reconsider their life choices.
And ultimately left a mark on the world that we can still feel today.
Exactly. And what I find so fascinating about Dean's story is that it gives us a glimpse into, the human side of missionary work in the 19th century.
We often hear those big, sweeping narratives, right?
Right.
But Dean's experiences, his own personal triumphs, his tragedies, they paint, a much more nuanced picture.
They really do. And that's what we're diving into today. This isn't just about, dates and places. It's about understanding the driving force behind this individual.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. William Dean, eldest of 8 children, born in 1807 in New York.
Can you imagine?
And then at just 16 years old, he loses his mother.
That's got to be a turning point, right?
It's the kind of loss that could completely derail someone.
Of course.
But for Dean, it seemed to solidify his commitment to ministry.
That same year. That's incredible.
It really is. So he throws himself into his studies at the Hamilton Literary and Theological Institute.
Honing his skills.
And ultimately feeling that call, that pull towards missionary work.
And keep in mind, we're talking about a time when venturing overseas, it was a massive undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. Filled with uncertainty, danger.
The risks were huge.
Huge. And yet, Dean felt drawn to share his faith in distant lands.
So much so that he applies to the General Missionary Convention of the Baptist denominations in the United States.
Quite a mouthful, right?
It is. But it shows how dedicated he was right from the start.
He was ready to embark on this grand adventure.
And he's accepted almost immediately after graduation. Which, speaks volumes, I think, about both his zeal, his obvious passion, and the sheer demand for individuals like him at the time.
It was a time of, burgeoning religious fervor?
Exactly. You have all these organizations actively seeking people willing to, spread their beliefs in uncharted territories.
So picture this. It's 1834. Young William Dean, fresh out of seminary, sets sail from Boston Harbor.
Destination.
Bangkok. And he's not alone. He's with his new bride, Matilda Coman.
Wow. Starting their lives together.
They are. They boarded a ship called the Kashmir. And let me tell you, this isn't some, leisurely transatlantic cruise. This was grueling.
I can only imagine.
A 150-day voyage to reach Bangkok.
150 days?
With stops in Amherst and Singapore along the way.
Just trying to comprehend the sheer determination it must have taken to embark on a journey like that, knowing the risks, the uncertainties waiting for them.
The things we take for granted today.
Right. Air travel, instant communication, they had none of that.
It boggles the mind. And tragically, this journey, it took a heartbreaking turn in Singapore. Matilda, after giving birth to their child, dies. You're in a foreign land, thousands of miles from everything familiar, and you're facing the unimaginable grief of losing your wife, the mother of your newborn child. How do you even begin to process that, let alone find the strength to continue?
It's a testament to something, isn't it? The complexity of the human spirit. To persevere in the face of that kind of loss, it suggests a faith, a resilience that I think is hard to truly grasp today.
It really is. And Dean, faced with this impossible situation, makes the heartbreaking decision to leave his child in the care of American missionaries stationed in Singapore.
And he pressed on.
He did. He arrived in Bangkok in 1835. And you might expect him to be, utterly overwhelmed by grief. But Dean, he throws himself into his work.
Remarkable.
He recognized that to connect with this community, to truly serve them, he needed to speak their language, literally and figuratively. So he begins this intensive study of Chinese and the local dialects.
That's dedication.
What does that tell you about his mindset?
To me, it reveals remarkable adaptability, a deep respect for the culture he was trying to engage with. He understood that real connection, it requires more than just preaching.
It demands understanding.
Yes. Meeting people where they are.
He really dove in head first, didn't he? He didn't just focus on preaching. Almost as soon as he gets to Bangkok, he establishes a school.
It's easy to see that as like a side project,
Right.
But it actually says so much about his whole approach to missionary work.
In what way?
Well, think about it. Education, especially back then in the 19th century, it was a powerful tool.
Oh, absolutely.
It allowed Dean to build relationships within the community, show that he was genuinely invested in their well-being. It wasn't just about, converting souls. It was about improving lives.
And improve lives he did, but not without facing some serious obstacles. Disease, cultural barriers, the isolation.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Thousands of miles from home, a new language, a new culture, constant threats to your health. I think most people would just pack up and go home.
I know I would. There's a quote that really captures the emotional toll of all this. It's from Francis Wayland Goddard's book called To Kathy.
Let's hear it.
He writes, "Besides the supports of faith, there was nothing to sustain them under the loss of children and companions who died and were buried, often by stranger hands, in a land that could never be anything but a land of strangers."
Powerful.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the sacrifices made by these individuals.
It does.
But Dean, despite all of this, he also experienced these moments of, triumph. In 1835, he holds his first baptisms in Bangkok.
A real milestone.
And then, just a year later, in 1836, he establishes the Matrichit Chinese Baptist Church, which is considered one of the earliest Chinese Christian churches in the world.
Wow.
This wasn't just about, creating a place of worship. It was about establishing this sense of community for these Chinese Christians in a foreign land.
The belonging.
Exactly. But his life, it was this constant back and forth between triumph and tragedy.
That's it.
In 1838, just a few years into his time in Bangkok, his health deteriorates, and he's forced to relocate to Macau.
Which was?
It was a Portuguese colony just off the coast of China. And it was in Macau that Dean's life took this really unexpected turn.
Tell me more.
So he meets Theodosia Ann Baker, a teacher at a school run by missionary Carl Gutzlaff, with whom Dean was staying.
Okay.
And they fall in love.
After such heartbreak. To find love again.
Right, and it wasn't a fleeting thing. They were married that same year.
Wow.
A testament to their connection, their shared sense of purpose.
Absolutely.
Together, they returned to Bangkok, filled with this renewed energy.
Ready to continue the mission.
They were. And in 1841, they welcomed a son, Edmund Dean.
Oh, how wonderful.
But tragically, their joy was short-lived. Edmund's life is cut short, and they're plunged back into mourning.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, of just how fragile life was back then.
Yeah. It really is. But even then, facing yet another heartbreaking loss, Dean and Theodosia, they persevered. And in 1842, they set sail from Bangkok, this time headed for Macau, awaiting further instructions from their mission board.
So what happened next?
They don't stay in Macau for long. They're soon assigned to Hong Kong, which at the time was this burgeoning British colony. And they're there to work alongside these prominent missionaries, John Lewis Shook and I.J. Roberts.
I see.
And this move, it marked a significant shift for Dean's mission. He went from focusing on the Siamese community to the Cantonese community.
Which was rapidly growing in Hong Kong, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. It was a melting pot. All these cultures, languages, traditions. It was a hub of trade and immigration.
And this presented what kind of challenges for Dean?
Well, for starters, imagine navigating this environment. Different dialects, different traditions. It would require constant adaptation. But as if that wasn't enough, tragedy strikes again.
Oh, no, not again.
In 1843, just a year after arriving in Hong Kong, Theodosia dies from smallpox.
Leaving Dean a widower.
For the second time. And a single father to their infant daughter, Fanny.
It's hard to fathom that kind of loss. Over and over again.
And yet he continued. Dean quickly mastered the Cantonese dialect, immersing himself in the lives of the people he was trying to reach.
He had this incredible way of bridging cultural and linguistic divides, didn't he?
He did. In fact, that same year, 1843, he establishes the Hong Kong Swatow Baptist Church,
Which was specifically for
the Cantonese-speaking community.
So it wasn't just about translating sermons then. It was about creating this space where people could connect with their faith in a way that felt familiar, that resonated with their cultural background.
Exactly. And his commitment to building community, it went beyond Hong Kong Island itself. He also extended his outreach to the fishing communities on Chung Chau Island. He even established a church there. He was driven to share his message far and wide. But it wasn't just about preaching and establishing churches. Dean also played a key role in translating the Bible into Chinese.
A monumental task, especially back then, without any of the tools we take for granted today.
Right. It was a massive undertaking. In 1843, Dean participated in this really important conference in Hong Kong
What was the goal?
to bring together missionaries from different denominations. And their goal was to produce this revised, more accurate Chinese translation of the Bible.
That sounds like it could have been a recipe for disaster, with so many different viewpoints in one room.
It's easy to imagine disagreements.
There must have been some clashes.
There were. Despite their shared goal, there were differing opinions on translation choices, interpretations. In fact, 4 years into the project, representatives from Dean's own mission board, the American Baptist Missionary Union, they withdrew from the effort altogether.
Really?
Because of these differing viewpoints, it really makes you think about the complexities of translation.
Especially with a text as old and open to interpretation as the Bible.
Right. I mean, what even is a correct translation? It's a question scholars are still debating today. But despite these disagreements, Dean, he remained committed to making the Bible accessible to Chinese readers. Between 1848 and 1853, he publishes his own translations of several books of the Bible.
Which ones?
Hebrews, Acts, Genesis, Exodus. He even collaborated with another missionary, Josiah Goddard, on a translation of the New Testament. Language, communication, it was also central to his mission. He understood that to truly share his faith, he needed to connect with people in their own language.
It was about meeting them where they were.
Exactly. So after 2 decades of relentless work, unimaginable loss, Dean decides to return to the United States in 1854 with his daughter, Fanny.
And who could blame him after all he endured? Taking a break, finding some peace.
It seems more than reasonable.
He poured his heart and soul into his mission and faced challenge after challenge.
He really did.
And don't forget, he's in his late 40s by this point, not the young man who first set sail from Boston.
You'd think his adventuring days were over, right?
You'd think so.
But retirement, well, it wasn't exactly in William Dean's vocabulary.
What do you mean?
He returns to the U.S., and this is where Maria Stofter enters the picture.
Tell me about Maria.
Well, she was a remarkable woman, a widow herself, actually.
Oh.
Her husband had been a missionary, Daniel Brown.
Another missionary connection?
It's incredible when you think about it, right? But Maria, she had been working in Thailand, running a school.
So she was actively involved in missionary work herself.
Very much so. They were kindred spirits, these two.
Drawn to the same cause.
And that shared passion, well, it blossomed into love. They married, and Dean had a family once more.
His daughter, Fanny, and
Maria's 2 sons from her previous marriage. They settled in New York, and for a while, it seemed like Dean might finally embrace a quieter life.
Surrounded by family, loved ones.
It seemed like the perfect time to just step back, reflect.
What?
But in 1864, after almost a decade of, what we might call semi-retirement, 57-year-old Dean does something remarkable.
He goes back, doesn't he?
He does. He petitions the mission board to return to the field.
Wow. What drives someone to do that? Leave behind comfort, family, especially at that age?
I think it speaks to the power of his calling. This wasn't just a job for Dean, it was a deep-seated passion.
A lifelong commitment?
Exactly. And he doesn't just ask to return anywhere, he specifically requests to go back to Bangkok.
Back to where it all began.
It's like this magnetic pull, this longing.
The connections he forged there must have run deep.
They did. And this time, he wasn't alone. His daughter, Fanny, she was a missionary herself by this point, decided to go with him.
What a powerful image, that father-daughter duo returning to the very place where his journey began.
It's almost poetic, isn't it?
It is. And this wasn't just a nostalgic trip. Dean, he was driven to make a difference.
Yeah.
He found his original church, the matriculated Chinese Baptist Church, without a pastor.
What perfect timing.
It was. And he stepped right back into the role.
Like he'd never left.
And get this, his second act in Bangkok, well, it was far from a repeat performance. He approached his work with this renewed vigor, established 6 new churches, 7 mission outposts, and even started another school.
This man never slowed down. Education clearly remained a cornerstone of his mission.
It did. And his dedication to translation, that never wavered either.
Of course not. Between 1856 and 1870, he published translations of the Pentateuch.
The first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Right. The historical books of the Old Testament, and even a revised edition of the New Testament. His commitment to making the Bible accessible was unwavering. But in 1880, after 16 years back in Bangkok, his wife, Maria, fell ill.
Oh no.
She returned to the United States for treatment, but sadly, her illness proved fatal.
Another devastating loss.
Dean remained in Bangkok a few more years, continuing his work before finally returning to the U.S. in 1884.
And he lived out his remaining years.
Reflecting on a life dedicated to sharing his faith across continents, he died peacefully in 1895.
At the age of 88,
A long life, filled with incredible highs and lows. William Dean, he was a builder of communities, a gifted linguist, a tireless advocate for the people he served.
a man who truly lived his faith.
And that's the story of William Dean. It makes you think about the power of one person's dedication,
The impact they can have on the world.
even in the face of incredible adversity. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive with us. Until next time.